Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to what happened to Tokyo Revengers. Now I did get permission from the content creator to react to this, so thank you very much for that. And I do want to be upfront, I did not watch any of the anime. I did, however, read a lot of the manga when it was gaining popularity, and it was like a few years before the anime even released. I was planning on watching it, but I kind of forgot about it. But I do wonder what happened, because I thought it would be very popular, and it did have pretty good reviews when it first came out. So let's see if this will give me some insights to what happened.
What happened at Tokyo Revengers? This went from a universally loved manga to a tragically forgotten story, all because of one arc. Which is a shame, because this manga brought people together by honoring classic manga and resonating with all kinds of different readers. But
oh yeah, that was one thing I really enjoyed. I actually wasn't planning to read a lot of it. I was really bored. I always seem to find gems whenever I'm really bored, but I was really bored, so I decided to read it. And I think a friend recommended it to me, or else I just found it on like the recommended, you know, like those front page on the manga websites. I think that's how I found it, perhaps. I'm not really sure which one it is. But I chose to read it because it reminded me of like the old days, and it's kind of rare to find one that gives similar vibes as the old series and mangas that I've read in the past. And I read it and it was really good. It was very emotionally impactful, and I haven't had that much fun in a long time thanks to it, that I was able to reignite some passion or love for manga again. But it was one of those where you pick it up and then you can't put it down for a long time. And this was one of them, and I finished and caught up to like within 2 days, because I really enjoyed it.
now that it's been over 2 years, I think it's time we go back and talk about why this ending isn't as bad as you remember. So in this video, I'd like to talk about the massive popularity of Tokyo Revengers, discuss the reasons it resonated with so many different people, address the flaws that led to its tragic downfall, and explain why it's still one of the all-time best manga. Just be warned that there will be major spoilers at the end of the video.
I'll probably be upfront that I'm not going to read the rest of Tokyo Revengers because I don't want to reread the whole thing. So I'm okay if it talks about the end. And quite frankly, it's really, as I was reading it, I thought to myself that it would be really hard to actually have a satisfying ending for this series. So, and hearing this, I think my thoughts were correct. I do wonder how exactly they ended it, though.
First, I want to talk about just how popular this series was. Because if you're a new fan, then you might not be aware. But even if you already read the manga, you might not remember just how popular it was, as it only had 2.3 million copies in circulation after 13 volumes. But around volume 22, when the anime finally dropped, the copies in circulation increased by over 2,000%, growing from 2.3 to 50 million copies in less than a year. And according to Oricon in 2023, a year after the manga ended, Tokyo Revengers sold another 3 million copies. In terms of sales, this ranks Tokyo Revengers alongside some of the all-time best manga, including Berserk, Gintama, and Yu Yu Hakusho. And of course, if you keep up with seasonal anime, then you know Tokyo Revengers was a massive success during its first season. The second and third seasons are a different story, but we'll get into that later in the video. For now, I think we can agree that Tokyo Revengers was a mainstream success. The manga didn't pick up right away, but after a while, it blew up fast, and that success paved the way for the anime to become one of the most watched anime of 2021. And you don't have to be Elon Musk to figure out why Tokyo Revengers was such a big hit. The story follows the struggles of Takemichi, a washed-up 26-year-old who has a quarter-life crisis when he finds out that his old middle school girlfriend Hinata was murdered by gangsters. But when he discovers he has the power to travel back and forth in time, he teams up with his girlfriend's brother, Naoto, to solve the mystery of Hinata's death and put an end to Tokyo's deadliest gang. To do that, he has to go back 12 years in time, infiltrate the motorcycle gang known as Tokyo Manji Gang, or Tomon for short, and find out how to stop Hinata's murderers in the past.
I almost forgot about
this. During
this
mission, he becomes friends with Mikey, the laid-back leader of
Tomon,
so it is Mikey. With a mysterious dark edge, as well as Draken, Mikey's badass right hand who's been—
oh yeah, I liked him the most. I mean, I liked the other characters too, but then within the game itself, I liked him the most.
following Mikey since they were kids. While struggling to stop Hinata's murderers, Takemichi finds a new identity in this gang of teens that solve their problems with their fists, but just want to ride motorcycles and share stories together. And with each step towards his goal, Takemichi grows into the kind of person that he was never strong enough to be in the present. Clearly, there's more than a few reasons why it's easy to get into Tokyo Revengers, and anyone that has checked it out can tell you at least one thing that they really loved. But the reason this series became so popular is because it combines so many different tropes in a way that offers an incredibly accessible story. But real quick,
That
before I
is
say
true.
anything else, make sure to become a channel member if you're enjoying the video so far. You'll get exclusive badges and emojis to show off in our weekly live streams, and you can pick which series I cover next. Now, one thing that stands out about this manga is the time travel. I remember when I first started the anime and told my friend, and they were like, "Oh, you mean the one that's erased but better?" And you know, they weren't exactly wrong. Tokyo Revengers does run into some issues down the line, but for the most part, it's one of the better executions of a time travel story. Specifically in the
true.
way it ties the time travel into the story's big mystery and uses it to make changes to that mystery in a fun and engaging way. So right off the bat,
It's
you
very
have a science
impactful.
fiction appeal as well as a mystery appeal. On top of that, one of the things that I think goes underappreciated in this story is the romance. There's more than a few romantic subplots, but the main one between Takemichi and Hinata is one of the story's biggest strong points. It takes what would otherwise be just a meat-headed thriller and gives it a welcome element of romantic tension. Now, some people will come at the show and say, "Ew, the show is weird. Why is a 26-year-old trying to date a 14-year-old girl?" And out of context, it's definitely weird. I'm not trying to say anything like that, but obviously there's a lot more to it. First, he met her when they were the same age in middle school. He's in love with the girl in the present, not the past. Plus, he has to make things right with Hinata in the past if he wants the opportunity to start things over as an adult in the present. So in terms of the ick
Yeah.
scale, I think we can say this series doesn't even come close to Mushoku Tensei or Seven Deadly Sins.
I think one of the nice things about the romance, though, obviously it's kind of weird when we think about it, but he always treated her with some level of respect, and in some ways, he also treated her like a kid. Like, obviously, it's a romantic interest, but he didn't really, maybe because he is older inside, he doesn't think of her as like a true romantic interest, even though like her adult self is it's kind of hard to like explain. But he always treated her with some level of distance but respect, but also wanting to be closer so that they can have a chance together in the future. I don't know if I'm remembering wrong, but that's what I remember, which is why I felt okay with what was going on. And she's always the one trying to prove that she's old enough, that she's, you know, strong enough to be by his side. So I always found that dynamic to be very interesting because clearly in the past he was very immature while she was the more mature one. But in here it's shifted a bit more where he's actually quite mature now. But even if she's mature to him, she still seems like a kid. So it was nice in that sense because of that.
Point being, the dynamic between Takemichi and Hinata is awesome, so it's a big reason why fans who don't want to watch just another shonen series can get into this one. And finally, probably the best thing about this story is the take on the delinquent trope. Now, in case you're unaware, the delinquent genre has been a big part of manga and has led to some of the most iconic characters and tropes in the industry. It all stems from the delinquent era of gangs in the 60s and 70s, followed by the increasing popularity of motorcycle gangs starting in the 80s and ending in the 2000s right around the time of Tomon. The whole subculture has led to tons of iconic characters like Jotaro and Josuke, Yusuke and Kurabara, and one of my favorites, Ryunosuke from Shaman King. There's a lot more manga and characters that I'm not referencing, and I'm completely doing the genre a disservice, but that's because I'm only just getting into this type of manga myself. Which
There's
brings
just
me
a
back
lot.
to my point. This genre has always always been popular with teens and younger readers. So when Tokyo Revengers came around, it took this genre, combined it with the popular trends we already discussed, and by doing so, created a new wave of delinquent manga fans. Now, I mentioned Yu Yu Hakusho before, and I want to bring it up again because it shares one big thing in common with Tokyo Revengers, namely the delinquent background. Yu Yu Hakusho is not a delinquent manga, but the reason so many young fans resonated with it back in the day was because they shared that common background. Like Yusuke, a lot of people had a less than normal home life and got into trouble at school. And this is exactly what happened again with Tokyo Revengers. Maybe you didn't grow up in the hood, so to speak, but regardless of where or how you grew up, everyone knew a Mikey. Everyone knew a Draken. Everyone at one point in their life has had that one group of troublemaking friends. And on top of all of that, everyone has had the one that got away. So Tokyo Revengers is kind of funny because it is literally a story about nostalgia because of the time travel. It's a story of nostalgia.
It makes me wonder what it would look like animated if in the 90s or something. I feel like it would fit in very well. Because of the whole themes and tropes that they use in this series.
Because it looks back on the era of motorcycle gangs in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it's a story of nostalgia that anyone can relate to because it brings up memories of shared upbringings and rough times. Clearly, the reason Tokyo Revengers is such a popular story is because it's the kind of story that anyone can get into. Even if you don't love every element like the motorcycles or the romance, there's something for everyone to invest in. That's why it was such a mainstream success. But of course, I'm using the past tense here, partly because the manga is finished, but also because it's not exactly a mainstream success anymore. And this wasn't something that happened overnight, but it almost happened even faster than the story's burst of popularity. I did a video almost 2 years ago titled Why Bad Manga Can Ruin Good Anime. At the time, I was still anime only, but as an anime and manga YouTuber, I was very aware of the manga's final reception. I managed to avoid any spoilers, but the general impression was that the series creator Ken Wakoi had ruined what was an otherwise perfectly good manga. So I made this video right after season 3 ended because I was loving the new seasons.
I wonder if it's the arc that I'm thinking of that ruined it, because that is where I stopped personally, because I felt like it lost its spark on what made it so refreshing and good. But I guess we'll see.
But whereas the entire community was hyping up season 1, it was complete radio silence by the time season 3 dropped. I mean, like, nobody was talking about the anime. Now, there are a couple of other reasons for this. Naturally, because the manga was finished, you had less interest than before. Another big factor was Disney was acquiring the streaming rights to a bunch of Kodansha anime, which led to a very awkward transition where you had to watch season 1 on Crunchyroll and then seasons 2 and 3 on Hulu if you were in the States. Hulu isn't exactly an anime killer, but its track record so far is less than amazing. But of course, the big reason nobody was talking about the anime was because everyone was sick of the manga. Now again, I only just read the manga. Back then, all I knew was that everyone thought the manga should have ended before the last arc, and that last arc ruined what was basically a perfect story. In other words, the story was complete, but everyone hated the ending because it felt redundant and in some cases actually ruined the earlier parts of the story. Again, I'm coming into this late, so I can't speak to the...
Okay, I recognize this scene, so it might be the arc that I'm thinking of. So that was the last arc, okay.
As someone who's been watching the anime since day one and still loves the manga, it's only fair that we have an honest discussion about the story's clear flaws. First of all...
Maybe it's not the exact scene that I'm thinking of, but I think it is the... I think the beginning of the last arc is where I stopped and then forgot about it. I just never... Unless the... Wait, when did the manga finish? Because did it finish before the anime? No. It seemed like it was during. So maybe it was the arc before the last arc. By the way, there was like a certain point where it felt like it was getting a little bit too, as he said, redundant and kind of boring, if I'm going to be honest. Because it was really good up to that specific point. I think it was the arc when he comes back to the present. And it was obviously after the, I think it was like the church, and Dragon's situation or something, and he was trying to take care of that, and then he went to the present time to see if, you know, what he did has changed things for the better, because he wanted to save them, from what I remember. And it appears that Mikey still had a lot of things, and he was the only one that was, you know, dealing with a whole bunch of stuff. So maybe that was the arc before the last arc. Honestly, I'm kind of glad that I stopped where I did, though, because if it's that bad, to the point that people are saying that it ruins the anime, then maybe it's better for me to just remember the good days.
Back to chapter 1, but one of the things a lot of people would use to attack the story is that it was corny. Stuff like Takemichi is a crybaby, it uses the power of friendship, the usual stuff. Now, I can't.
Yeah, that's
argue with
typical,
that.
though.
A lot of that stuff is true to an extent, so if you don't like stories that lean into a lot of corny tropes, then that's understandable. But it's also important to remember that this is a story that relies heavily on nostalgia. Naturally, it's going to be a wholesome story that ultimately ends things on a positive note. So saying that Tokyo Revengers is corny is ignoring the underlying appeal of the story. That being said, this does influence a lot of the events in the ending that I can't exactly defend. And let's talk about what I mean. So the big arc before the final arc is the Tenjiku arc. The series antagonist teams up with Mikey's lost brother Izana in a final attempt to take over Tomon. In a dastardly scheme,
Okay, so it was the start of this arc, so it must have been
Kisaki leaves
second to
Mikey and
last.
Draken both unable to fight, leaving Takemichi as the
Because I remember the arc that I stopped at introduced Mikey's brother, and there were some things that they did with Mikey's brother, and then that's where I kind of stopped, because I was like, I'm kind of tired.
acting leader of the gang against some of Tokyo's strongest delinquents. By all definitions, his team clearly should have lost, but through an unwavering brotherhood and sheer willpower, Takemichi's group stands up to the enemy gang, Mikey comes to terms with his family, and Takemichi finally defeats Kisaki and saves Hinata. So he gets Mikey to disband Tomon, everyone gets their dream ending in the future, and Takemichi gets engaged to his dream girl. By all means, this was the perfect ending. He made some hard choices and lost some friends along the way, but Takemichi overcame those obstacles and earned the perfect ending that he deserved. Except this wasn't the ending, because while everyone else is in La La Land, Takemichi soon learns that Mikey is leading a new gang due to
Yeah, that's where I ended. This is where I ended. Okay. Now I'm starting to remember.
the mysterious dark impulse that's been controlling him his entire life. So Takemichi goes back in time and has to create a new gang and get into another big fight. Now, there's a million things people don't like, but again, I wasn't around and I don't want to misrepresent anyone. If you'd like to see what people were saying, you can find the reviews pretty easy. That being said, there's at least a couple of blatant flaws. First of all is the so-called dark impulse, specifically the way it tied into the series finale. Prior to this ending, Wakoi had done a great job of explaining the time travel and keeping everything consistent as he developed the story and added new layers. And the whole time, it was repeatedly established that Mikey had a dark side to him that practically haunted him. But then in the final arc, this dark impulse gets a name and gains an almost occult element, which isn't that absurd in a time travel story. But what's worse is we find out that Mikey's older brother was the original time leaper, that he saved Mikey and gave him the curse of the dark impulse as a result, and he was the one that gave Takemichi his powers. There's also some other factors like the fact that Takemichi gains the power to see into the future, and the fact that the new villain Haruchio was kind of implied to be the second time leaper in order to create a red herring. All in all, Wakoi aims to answer all of our questions about the time travel and resolve Mikey's arc, and he does achieve this, but in a way that feels somewhat overcomplicated considering how the Tenjiku arc was handled. Speaking of which, another big problem with this ending is how repetitive it feels. For example, Tenjiku is a battle between Tokyo's two biggest gangs, and the enemy gang has this group of super tough fighters that all went to juvie together, but they're eventually defeated. But in the final arc, these characters all come back, plus you get some new characters that are basically like the super version of those guys. You also have this character Kakucho, who was a big part of Tenjiku and got a resolution, who was then wedged in with the villains again with no new character growth. On top of that, the fight takes place in basically the same place. Prior to this, Wakoi was always good about making the setting a big part of the fights. So like in one arc, the fight's outside of a festival. In another arc, they fight in some big junkyard. In one arc where the fight happens on Christmas, they actually fight in a church. In Tenjiku, it just happens in some random shipyard. But Takemichi chases Kisaki down to the spot where Hinata gets murdered in the future. But in the final fight, it just happens in some random spot that looks and feels like the shipyard in Tenjiku. It's another big fight in another random spot, so I couldn't help reading the final fight and being like, am I crazy, or is this just Tenjiku all over again? On top of everything feeling so repetitive, you also have new twists that don't quite hit. For example, Senju is introduced as this important character, but ultimately ends up as one of the more forgettable characters. Then Draken dies, saving Takemichi, which would have been pretty good, except he gets saved in the ending. Without getting into too much detail, the characters go back in time one last time, and when they do, they save everyone. This includes Draken, Baji, who was dead for a really long time and influenced a ton of characters, and Kisaki. Yes, the villain who ordered the assassination of civilians and runs all the drugs and prostitution in Tokyo and ruins Takemichi's life is ultimately saved. So among other things, people didn't like this ending because it overcomplicated things, it reused a lot of the same stuff from the previous arc, and it undid all of the major deaths and forcefully redeemed the true villain of the story. Now, here's what I have to say about these flaws. First, let me just say that I hate what happens to Kisaki. He was the perfect scumbag and had the perfect death, so I think the fact that he's saved in the end just because Takemichi and Mikey respect him is stupid. Like, I can see why they feel bad for him, but just because Wakoi wanted to establish some sympathy for the villain doesn't mean he had to give him a half-assed redemption. So to that point, I think it's a pretty clear flaw in the story. In regard to the repetitiveness, I think
by the time that I reached the arc that he mentioned earlier, I was getting tired of the repetitiveness. That's probably why I stopped. Honestly, the part when, everyone had a happy ending, you should have just ended there. That would have been the perfect ending, actually. Like, he didn't have to mention Mikey's future or whatever. It would have been the perfect ending. But no. They had to do... I bet it's the editor that was pressuring him or something. Because if the author is the one that actually chose to elongate it to cover that stuff, then I don't know what to say. That's kind of... That's really bad.
It's as bad as the Kisaki thing, but to a lesser extent, I also think it's a pretty clear flaw for the simple reason that the final arc just feels like a rehashing of all of the same tropes and formulas we had already seen. Now, in regard to the ending complicating and arguably ruining the story, that's where I have to disagree. Do I think the ending is flawed? Yes. Do I think that Wakoi kind of shoehorned these final resolutions into the ending in a way that is clearly less polished than the other 200?
Yes, but I also think, if that's the way he wants to end it, that's the way he's gonna end it. It's kind of one of those, like, I don't like the ending, but, I'll just accept it because there's no point in, like, getting angry over it,
100 chapters? Yes. But do I think these things ruined the entire story? Not even close.
Probably not.
I could spend another 20 minutes listing everything wrong about the ending.
Honestly, you could just end where, he talked about, and then just think that that's the end. Then that would have been perfectly fine. And even if you do, watch or read the ending, doesn't mean that you have to accept it as the true ending in your head. Obviously it is, but... it doesn't mean that it's going to ruin the entire series because he still had a really nice experience with it until that point, right?
But there's plenty of other videos that already do that, and I've kinda addressed the main issues. Plus, I don't think this ending is as objectively bad as people think it is. I think we needed another arc to resolve this dark edge to Mikey's character. Did I like the way it was handled? Not really. But I did
So basically, the ideas were fine. It's just that the execution wasn't done well, which is why people are probably angry. But overall, I mean, the supernatural stuff, okay, that's fine. I mean, I've seen plenty of series that do it like that, anyways. I just wish they could have put that stuff like a little bit before the ending that we thought was gonna be the ending, but wasn't. And it was just gonna be the start of a new arc. At least that's my opinion. I mean, overall, it's a really solid series, and just because the end is bad doesn't mean that the entire series is bad. I mean, then again, everything's subjective anyways, so if you think it's bad, then I guess it's bad to you.
Did like the irony that the curse that made Mikey this way was caused by the brother he practically worshipped. I liked that Wakoi gave some context to the time leaping as a morally gray tool that could only be used for good depending on the user. I also liked that Wakoi set things up so that Takemichi was basically carrying the will of Mikey's brother the whole time, so the final fight was like the last goodbye Mikey never got to have. There's a lot of other things I enjoyed, like the fact that Taiju was redeemed in the end, and the way Takemichi brought the original Tomon back together. Again, it did feel somewhat repetitive, but I also really enjoyed Takemichi developing the next generation along with Chifuyu and Hawkeye. It's a small thing, but it went a long way to show how Takemichi had grown as a leader by building his own crew like Mikey had done before. At the end of the day, it's not the best ending in the world, and especially considering how emotional
It's not the best ending in the world, but it's not the worst ending in the world. I feel like there's probably other series that have the worst ending in the world. If you know a series like that, let me know down below. I would love to see what you consider to be the worst ending in the world. Because from what I hear, the ending's fine. It's just the execution wasn't done well, even though the ideas were kind of weird sometimes, but like you can accept it since, you know, anime logic. But it's definitely not the worst. Although if the quality isn't as high as the other arcs, then that's probably why people think that it's a terrible ending. And as someone who hasn't read the last arc, maybe that's a good thing. Clearly the quality wasn't on par as the other ones and it felt too repetitive. Because it's fine to do repetitive things as long as you do it in a refreshing way each time, you know?
invested people were, it makes total sense why it got the reception it did. But at the same time, it's hard to look back and say that this ending completely undermines the influence this story had on fans. It created a new generation of delinquent manga fans, but more than anything, it was a massive source of nostalgia that resonated with people who grew up with tough times and tougher friends. It's a heavy story that still ends things on a positive note. While it doesn't exactly stick the landing, it's impossible to say the rest of the story isn't a thing of beauty. So sure, the ending does hurt the overall impression, but it does have its upsides. Plus, no matter what anyone says, Tokyo Revengers will always be one of my all-time favorite stories. But what do you think? How did you like the ending? Do you think it ruins the story? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And don't forget to become a channel member. You'll get exclusive badges and emojis, you can pick which series I cover next, and you can get credited in future videos. Also check out my original video, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.
Okay, so overall, I think the series is great, especially for those who watched a lot of 1900s and early 2000s anime, because there were always at least one character that was like a delinquent, especially in the non-fantasy and more school life type of series. Except for maybe shoujo. No, I think there was like maybe like a few. Either way, there were a lot of characters. So even if you don't have people around you who are like whatever you see in this show, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. Because if you grew up watching 1900s and early 2000s anime, then it's very much a nostalgic burst from that, because the joy that you received from those 1900s and early 2000s anime is very reminiscent from here. And it just goes to show that nostalgia can be a very powerful thing. But because it's also very powerful, if you handle it wrong at the very end, then it becomes something that people will immensely talk bad on. Like if you handle it badly. So sometimes nostalgia can be a great thing, but it's a double-sided weapon or whatever you want to call it. I don't remember the term, phrase. What's the phrase? Tell me. But either way, I did enjoy Tokyo Revengers mostly for that nostalgic burst, but it's not something that I would consider to be my number one favorite because there are plenty of other like 1900s or early 2000s anime that I consider to be a much higher quality from beginning to end. That doesn't need to just rely on the power of friendship or the lessons that it wants to impart. But I cannot deny the power that it had during the most emotional moments. And that's something that I remember very well, especially the part with the church. That was a really strong arc, in my opinion. And out of all the arcs, I think that's the biggest, I guess, scene that I really enjoyed and remembered the most from the series. If you watched Tokyo Revengers or read it, which scene is the most impactful to you personally? I'd love to know what part of it appealed to you and why it was the most impactful for you. Or if you just hate the series, then it is what it is. It's always a subjective thing if you enjoy a series or not, so we never know. Sometimes a series can be rated really low, but you might enjoy it because it's just your type of story, even if it's considered trash by others. It's always a subjective thing, which is why it's always interesting to learn why someone might enjoy one thing or another. In any case, I really enjoyed watching this video, and if you enjoyed it too and you enjoyed my reaction to it, then be sure to give it a like, comment below, subscribe and share, and make sure to support the original video. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.